Well, just so for those of you joining us that don't know, we recently launched a podcast called Cacao Culture, where we've been interviewing and just recording a wide range of topics, all the way from our single estates here in the Dominican Republic, our chocolates that are handcrafted in the New York store, interviewing different personalities. Now we're doing a tasting. This is the first tasting we do with Lauren, and we will be recording this for the purpose of the podcast as well as for the YouTube channel. Yes, we're recording. And for those of you that don't know me, my name is Daisy Polanco. I work in the Rizek company based here in the Dominican Republic. And I've been the host of these podcasts. But also with me today are Max Wax. Max, show yourself.
Hello.
And Nadia Rizek.
Hello. Hello.
Max is a seasoned expert on all cacao and chocolate related matters. And Nadia is a fifth generation of the Rizek family. She's the manager at our cacao store in New York. And we also have Damien. Damien, feel free to say hello.
Hi, everybody. I'm the head chocolate maker here at Cacao USA in Brooklyn. And the tasty treats that you guys all be enjoying today have come out of this team here and what we've been doing over the past year plus that we've been open. Yeah, exciting.
And for those of you that don't know Lauren, which are a few, I'm guessing, Lauren is a pioneer in the craft chocolate industry with over a decade of experience introducing consumers to fine chocolate. She was the founder of the very famous retail store in Seattle, Chocolopolis, and she currently serves as the vice president of the board in the FCIA. The FCIA is the Fine Chocolate Industry Association. We will also talk a little bit about the amazing work that these guys have done throughout the pandemic. Lauren has also been a speaker and a panelist at numerous FCIA conferences, such as the Northwest Chocolate Festival, the Dallas Chocolate Festival. She's also been a chocolate judge at the International Chocolate Awards, the Good Food Awards, and the Northwest Chocolate Festival. She's also the co-founder of the Pacific Northwest Chocolate Society. Lauren enjoys sharing stories of cacao and chocolate with chocolate lovers and watching the aha moments of new chocophiles as they discover how good chocolate can taste when crafted with fine flavor cacao. And that's the topic of our discussion today.
Daisy, I think we wanted to just start by talking a little bit about work with the FCIA before we dive into the tasting and Rizek. And so many of you are maybe familiar with it, but the Fine Chocolate Industry Association, of which I'm the vice president, it's a trade organization focused on craft chocolate and fine chocolate. And it's been kind of interesting with COVID because, originally we would gather together on the West Coast or the East Coast at different times of the year and have these in-person meetings. But COVID has allowed us to really focus on webinars. And it's amazing because we're an international organization, but we're based in the US. And so the webinars, like everything all of us are experiencing, the webinars and have really reduced the boundaries. And so we're doing much more internationally. And they've just been an amazing way for people to connect more frequently and have higher value with their connections and really create community, kind of what we're doing here. And I think one of the parts, though, that's been great is the international piece. And I know Rizek did a wonderful tour of their cocoa farm, a virtual tour on a webinar. It was the highest attendance we had at a virtual webinar. And I mean, Max was walking around the fermentation facilities and and showing us about that. And I'm curious how what was that experience like for you guys?
Well, it was really exciting. To tell you rather frankly, it was the very first time we shared our fermentation facility with anyone. Normally, we tend to keep it a little bit secret since it's something that we have developed as a know-how over the years. So we try to keep it for ourselves. But we thought that with this COVID thing, the time had come really to share because we all needed to be connected. And so we were like entering a new phase of non-competitiveness and like a pre-competitive kind of state of mind, of mindset. And it was really exciting for me to share all I could in those 2 hours. And I think it was the same feeling of, let us say, generosity or altruism for Nadia and for all the other persons involved. So it was really very good, very complicated technically. Uh, we didn't know that our dryers were so hot. So when we got into the dryer with 60 degrees Celsius, basically all the connections shut off.
Yeah, it was not an
It was
internet
not
issue.
perfect. It was
And
not
It was
perfect.
the heating. The heat was just so much. It
Exactly.
completely shut off the
and it
that
was,
we were recording.
yeah, and it was surprising for us also to see the amount of engagement and attendance. Before COVID, we would have people visit the fermentation, one or two people, but it was it was incredible how much engagement we received with a video tour. And
Yes. Never
COVID has
200
really taught
people.
us
Yes.
that we are able to share in different ways, let's say.
And in a way, it also showed us that we need to be as connected as possible because we need to survive as a sector. We don't need to survive just as individual companies. So we need each other's help.
Hey, Max, I'm curious if, this group probably doesn't know a lot about Rizek, and you sort of alluded to your fermentation practices and being a little bit more willing to share your secret sauce, but maybe you could give us an overview of what is it about your tradition and of fermentation and what you bring to the table maybe that others don't, or how what you're able to do with fermentation. And, we've got a heavy group of consumers on here, but they're all pretty geeky about cacao and chocolate.
That's how
And I
we
think
like
they're going
them.
to want to hear a little bit about this.
Yes, instead of an old tradition, I have to say we tried to establish a new tradition just starting 20 years ago. We wanted a clean slate. Cacao was a very traditional, still is a very traditional field where farmers think they know absolutely everything. If you ask a farmer from Ghana, he says he's the best. A farmer from Venezuela will say he's the best. A farmer from the Ivory Coast will say they're the best. And if you ask them why, they say, because I've learned it from my grandfather and so forth. And this type of traditional knowledge goes back to the colonies, goes back to Christopher Columbus. But in a way, cacao had never been studied with a modern eye. And the Dominican Republic was in a very strange situation in the early 2000 or 99 from 2000, that the genetic base of the country was fantastic, but the tradition in fermentation and selling high-end cacao was close to zero. We were just exporting what is known as Sanchez cacao from the port of Sanchez. So we were basically not processing a jewel that we had in our genetic base. So my task when I joined the RISEC group was exactly to start and study how we could get the Dominican Republic to become what it deserves to be, which is a fine and flavor cacao producer. So our first approach was say, okay, we know nothing, let's study. We started hiring people, hardcore scientists, but nobody coming from the field of cacao, because all agronomists think they know absolutely everything, and we needed people who knew they knew nothing in order to learn something, like in a Socratic manner. And so we hired people from universities that were used to fermentation in beer, milk, dairy in general, cheese, and wine, and started cooperations with companies and research institutes. And very slowly we gather our, I would say, what is now a sort of exclusive knowledge about the microbiology and the biochemistry involved in cacao. Once we got this basis of solid scientific knowledge, we tried to develop, and we did finally, a methods, materials, and processes to ferment cacao. And that is why our larger fermentation center comes from.
And so maybe you could talk, and I think when we get into the tasting, and I'm also going to ask Damien some questions when we're tasting, but maybe if you could, that's a great introduction, drill down a little bit more. How many different ways are you fermenting, or how do you think about when you want to try a new fermentation recipe? And then also, I think, one of the things when we were talking before this event for me is, as a now former retailer, but someone who also is still like doing bundles of chocolate, one of my biggest frustrations is, you can have an amazing bar of chocolate one time from a maker, and then you get the next batch and it's terrible. And from a practical standpoint as a retailer, I've now got this inventory sitting on my shelves and my customers don't want it because it's not the same as the last batch. And so there's this lack of consistency. And as I once said to one of the chocolate makers said to me, I'm not going for consistency. And I was like, okay, that's fine. like, consistency. What I'm saying is I just want a quality batch every time. It doesn't have to taste the same, but it almost sounds like you guys have been able to get your fermentation recipes down so that it does taste the same every time. But can you talk a little bit more about your ability to control consistency, and, how do you think about the different recipes and how many types of fermentation you do?
I would say that the first important point, a discrimination point here, is who ferments the cacao, because in most cases it's the farmers who do that, whereas in our case we have left the farmers as agronomists and we take from them fresh cacao beans. So we become responsible for the fermentation and the drying, doing things that our farmers don't have the luxury to do in terms of investments, basically, materials, personnel. We work 24/7, and standardization of processes. What you mentioned happens very, very frequently. If we were to leave the fermentation to our farmers, we would certainly have fantastic batches from time to time, all different from one another, but sometimes also very bad ones because they cannot cope. We cannot cope with the difficulties of climate and weather and other difficult situations, such as logistics, for example. So we decided, since the country is small enough, to centralize all the processes in one fermentation center and to become responsible for quality.
Okay.
Which is very good also for the farmers because they get the money, I would say, from 2 to 3 weeks earlier than they would have if they had sold the cacao dry. And when the cacao is fresh, it's always perfect. So there is no such thing as discounts, refactions, réfaction, as they call it in French, to the detriment of the farmers themselves.
We have somebody asking if you're inoculating or if you're, working with wild cultures. I'm guessing the answer is a combination.
It's a combination. We do that. One of the first 2 years of our research was exactly doing that, which is researching and making a sort of catalog of the native yeasts present in the Dominican Republic. Then we studied their metabolism. We studied their metabolites, which is what they digest after they have eaten the sugar. And after that, we did the DNA analysis of these yeasts to make sure that they were actually different varieties and not just the same strain repeated a number of times. So that was the first part of our study. Now we are exactly in the process of reproducing approximately 30 of them in cooperation with a big Japanese original multinational. And it is really very interesting because you can really tell what every individual yeast is bringing to the recipe. What we are not doing, we're not doing fermentation by inoculating with foreign yeasts or allogenous yeasts, because that would be a biological hazard for our fermentation center and potentially for the entire country, as yeast reproduce themselves very aggressively under certain circumstances. So we are not inoculating cacao with brewer's yeast or from yeasts coming from Bordeaux or from California, from the wine industry.
How much of the flavor development happens before you even get to the fermentation stage? So can things happen in the field? For example, I've talked to a group of cocoa farmers who said, oh, the midge was pollinating the bananas before it came over. That's why this batch has a banana note. Can that happen?
No, that's witchcraft.
Okay. I thought as much, but I'm like, they're cocoa farmers, I don't know. They must know something.
No. That doesn't happen. What does happen is how the terroir and what is present in the soil actually is absorbed by the metabolism of the plant. Now, the way that the metabolism of the plant synthesizes all that depends on genetics. So there are many flavors that derive from terroir filtered by genetics that cannot be modified by fermentation or created by fermentation. So there are some basic flavors that actually come from the plant, from the person, from the way you and I are built, and others from the environment, and others the way we are transformed during our lives.
So it sounds like you're saying that it can vary by the genetics of the tree. So you have some control over what genetics you're planting. And then can you influence the soil at all? Or, how do you think about that?
Yes, you can influence the soil, but in a selective manner by changing the pH The pH actually tells the plant what to absorb and what not, but you run the risk of impoverishing the plant by raising or lowering the pH in an aggressive manner. This causes a sort of chelation of the soil. So it's not a good thing to mess with that. Enrich the soil and give it proper fertility conditions, depth, and structure, of course. But trying to influence the taste by changing it's a bit too much. It goes in the sense of an artificial sophistication. What one should be aware of is what is the genetic, what is the plant that I am sowing, what can I expect in terms of flavor, knowing the genetics. And the genetics is a bit complicated. You have to go to molecular analysis and to DNA, and to that we have to be thankful to the Mars family since they made it public. So it is actually a knowledge that is available if a farmer wants to know. For example, a basic flavor that comes from genetics, that is the metabolism of the plant, that cannot be created by any sort of fermentation, is the floral. Floral notes are the way that a plant synthesizes and creates those small alcohols called terpenes or terpenoids, linalool and geraniol in specific, that give the very unique floral flavor, for example, to the good Ecuadorian beans. Other tastes can be modified, emphasized, pinpointed at whatever you can call it during the fermentation. And other flavors can be created and emphasized again during the second or third step, which is the roasting. And I think that Damien will be able to comment on that in depth.
Okay, so I have one other question for Nadia before we maybe turn to the tasting and Damien. Nadia, can you talk a little bit about the history of Rizek and how your family got started in cacao and maybe that journey and now you have your New York store. How did you end up doing that? So maybe give us a little overview.
So my great grandfather, he started planting cacao when he came from Palestine in 1905. And my grandfather, he bought the first farm. He started planting more cacao beans. And my father and his brother started exporting cacao beans to Europe and Asia and other places around the world. And so I'm the fifth generation, and we decided to open Cacao USA. It's a store, for those of you that haven't visited, it's a concept store where you can learn all about cacao and chocolate. We have a video wall with a live feed of the farms in Dominican Republic. We really want to show the potential of our beans and all the work we've done and our know-how for these 100 years through the chocolate. And I think Damien is going to talk a little bit about each bean and these 3 bars specifically, and how he has worked with each bean. And we're also, as we go, going to talk about the background of these beans and these farms and what they have that makes them special.
And just to be clear, that store is in Brooklyn. So when you can travel again, you can easily get there. All right, so let's turn to Damien. Before we get into the tasting, Damien, what's your story? I don't even know. Like, how did you end up becoming a chocolate maker? How did you connect with Rizek?
Well, I've been in the industry about 23 years. But started out at pastry once upon a time, and eventually focused in on chocolate confectionery manufacturing. Was in Europe for a number of years doing that. Came back to New York, dabbled my hands a little bit in having my own little confectionery company in the early 2000s. And then that eventually just turned into a consultancy sort of thing, where I was providing sort of back-end services for people who were interested in chocolate manufacturing and confectionery manufacturing, but really anything chocolate is sort of a bespoke model. If you wanted to do a chocolate, I would sometimes work with machines, sometimes help with business plans. It was sort of a one-stop shop, hopefully. In the process of doing all that, I've always had a very technical bent in terms of my appreciation of finished goods, things like, candy products, confectionery products, ganaches, emulsions, etc. And in the process of being nerdy in that way, just sort of came around to academic understanding of the bean to bar process and how that affects flavor and how that also affects rheology and various other things that would come into play as an end user. And some opportunities came up to be a part of some bean to bar projects, and that was really tremendous. It really helped take my experience with chocolate to a whole different level of what I was doing previously, and really be able to complete, outside of the agronomy and the fermentation, what the team does down in DR, so far as chocolate making goes, and then what you do with it. That became a very complete system for me. And I guess it was almost 2 years now. Nadia and I just happened to, I guess, cross paths on LinkedIn. Obviously, I knew who her family was and their place in the industry and the work that they've done with some well-known chocolate makers. And so this opportunity came up. We started talking, and here we are.
It sounds like you have a long background in confectionery. So you were a chocolate maker. I mean, you'd been making chocolate from the bean for some time before you got to Rizek, or was that sort of?
I had been doing it a little bit in and out for about 10 years prior, almost. Okay. It wasn't a consistent thing, but it had come up. I helped start another company here in Brooklyn. I was also consulting on some other small startups. So it was always there in one capacity or another. And then this was just an opportunity where the timing was just right, where I was with my life and what they were doing on the business end. Things just sort of coalesced. It was a bit of kismet, if you will. Good. Okay. Yeah, and here we are.
Well, you did great.
I'm glad you enjoy it. It's been a very intense year.
So I think if it's okay, we'll move to doing our tasting. I think we're going to go in this order. We'll walk you through it, so don't jump the gun. But we're going to start with El Valle, then Añejo, and then we'll end with West Indian. So if everybody wants to get out El Valle,
the orange, light orange color.
Orange, which is similar to West Indian in color, but
72%.
So maybe you can tell us about maybe the fermentation on this, or anything you want to share as we're getting ready to taste. And I'd also love to have any of you walk us through how you taste. I'm always curious to see. I mean, most people I know have a similar tasting process, but there's always little variations. So how do you guys like to taste?
No, I'd like to point out a few things about El Valle, which makes this being interesting at least from an historical point of view. The Suchard company invested in the Dominican Republic in the 1800s, and they bought a farm that they called, like their country, Helvetia, which means Switzerland. And that was this very farm that later passed on to a senator, another senator of the Dominican Republic, then to the dictator Trujillo, who became the owner since he was the only exporter until 1962. And then the senator of the province of Hato Mayor, and then it was bought by Mr. Joe Locandro in, I think, 1999. And so this was one of the first farms in the DR that was used to bring a new material from Trinidad and Tobago and Costa Rica and Ecuador in the 1800s. So this is very interesting. I'm not able to tell you very frankly if there is any of those trees left, but we do know that historically none of those trees were destroyed. So it was replanted, and let's say it was integrated with new material, but the old was not destroyed. So it's very, very interesting and very indicative of the evolution that the Dominican Republic has known as a country, of the several successive waves of importation of genetic material from other countries in Latin America and the Caribbean.
Okay, so everybody go ahead. If you haven't already, go ahead and taste. So I'm going to talk while you're tasting, but Nadia had sent me, I think, about 7 or 8 different bars to try, and I had to whittle it down to 3, which is hard to do. And I chose these 3 just because they had really unique flavor profiles. And I think, a lot of I'm betting a lot of you as my customers expect a fruitiness out of Dominican Republic. So I think these bars really demonstrate. I tried to stay away from really fruity ones because I wanted to show, how much variety there could be based on what Max was describing earlier.
Exactly. That's something. Sorry, Lauren. That's something that we actually want. It's one of our main goals as Cacao USA also to show that one country does not mean one flavor, but rather there's infinite possibilities for chocolate makers from just one country. that some people think, oh, this type of bean from this country usually tastes like this. Well, it's untrue. We have so many different recipes, as we call them, for chocolate makers. And the chocolate is a way of showing that the unique recipes that we have to offer for chocolate makers.
And I love, I mean, I don't always agree with the tasting notes on the back of a package. In this case, I do.
Yeah,
but also the black
personal.
olive for me and the black tea are just, the black olive in particular with this one, I find fascinating.
Yeah, the
It's
black
interesting.
olive. We always mention that at the store with Damien. The black olive here is very strong.
It
All
is.
right, I see 2 questions. Let's see. Kristen asks, for those of us who don't have a tasting process, what do you recommend? I've never done a chocolate tasting. Who would like to?
No, I think it's Lauren and Damien are the specialists.
I guess I use all 5 senses. So I always, I look at the chocolate first. You want to make sure it's shiny, it's free of blemishes. So you don't want it to have kind of that ashy color that would be if it had been exposed to moisture or heat. That's called bloom. That means the chocolate was not treated properly. You can still eat it, but it's not going to have all the lovely flavors and it's going to have strange texture. The next thing you want to do is rub it between your fingers under your nose and take small sniffs to kind of get your olfactory senses going. And, you know, smell is an important part of taste. Break it in half. You want to hear a nice snap sound that's well tempered. And then go ahead and taste it. I never chew. And I'm curious, I want to hear what Damien and you guys do afterwards, but this is my approach. I don't chew. You let it melt and you move it all around the inside of your mouth. I think the cocoa butter melts just below your body temperature, which is why chocolate has that lovely, or can have that very lovely cooling feeling. But the cocoa butter is helping distribute that flavor. And so if you chew it, 1, you know, it's gone in 2 seconds, and 2, you're not going to get those lovely notes. You're not really going to notice them. And then you're going to eat more chocolate too. So I'm curious, Damien, how does that square with what you like to do?
I mean, it basically covers the bases. I might have a couple of maybe a little bit more, some nuances that I like to enjoy. You know, the interesting thing about, you know, flavor is it's olfactory. It's not your tongue, right? And what they have found, and this is a technique used in wine, it's for people who are industrial flavor producers. You know, what happens when you're tasting is actually bimodal. You know, you have the aroma, which is what you first brought up, right? Bringing it to your nose. But if you change the way in which you slow it down, the way it melts, and allow the flavor really to go up into the back of the palate and to go into your olfactory via the mouth, what they have found is that the part of your brain that gets stimulated when you do that, it stimulates both the part of the brain that senses taste as well as the part of the brain that senses flavor. So it's an interesting thing. So even when you're smelling something, just purely on smell alone, you know, what goes directly into your nose, right, stimulates this part of your brain that processes smell. But a lot of the more subtler, more delicate, or more intricate flavors are actually coming via the mouth into the olfactory, where it's stimulating both the, you know, the taste senses and the smell senses. So what I like to do is, you know, take a little piece, start the same way I think it's always important to make sure the snap is good. You know, always check out the color. And I think what's interesting about this bar versus a lot of the stuff that we have here, which is coming from maybe the central part of DR in Duarte, which tends to have a fair degree of lightness in its color outside of roasting profiles. This is quite a bit darker in tone. So you do that, you melt it on your fingers, you get the smell going, then you take a piece, put it at the top of your mouth and just start rubbing it with your tongue and allow the heat, as you pointed out, to really melt it. Then expel all the air from your nose and your sinuses. And then what I do is I use my throat muscles here in a pumping action to force any air and volatiles here to go up. And it goes up through the back. And then I can start getting into more subtler tastes.
Thank you. That's really good.
We also shipped a chocolate tasting sheet
yes.
with those of you that got the kit, which has a space for notes for each sense.
And Damien, I don't know if you'll know the answer to this. I've asked a number of, or maybe Max, you will, I've asked a number of chocolate scientists, one of whom you know, certainly why this happens, and I haven't been able to get an answer, which is when you smell a chocolate and it tastes one way and then you go to taste it and it tastes nothing like that smell. Anybody know why that happens?
I mean, my assumption, not being a scientist, is that, a lot of the compounds here, they're different weights and they carry in volatiles in different ways. And a lot, as you pointed out with the fat, and this, you could use the same sort of thinking when eating and appreciating sort of Italian approaches to ice cream versus French versus American, when you start playing with fat levels and how fat distributes flavor. And this is something that we've spent a lot of time talking about, thinking about mouthfeel and sort of the cycle effect of mouthfeel and how that affects flavor. You might think that the way a chocolate melts in its rheology doesn't affect actual flavor compounds, but it very much does. Your perception, how readily the fat melts, so its percentage, what type of fat, like where you're sourcing your cocoa butter from, and how readily it melts in your mouth. What's the temperature of your mouth? Did you just take a swig of cold water before you did it? And so the fat is really what's carrying everything. So once that melts, you've got a whole lot of different compounds going on. And what I've noticed, especially here, when thinking about aging of chocolate, and this is something we can talk about later if you like, it's something that a lot of chocolate makers do, and it's kind of like a big secret how people handle aging of chocolate and allowing it to mellow and settle, is that certain compounds, especially like roast profile notes or certain acidic compounds, are very quick to dissipate. So even in the aging process. So my thinking is probably that there are, they're carried differently, they're different weights. And so your experience of them is going to be differently by the way they're melting and going into your head, basically.
Okay, that sounds like a really good answer to me. So I'm going to take that.
I don't know. So I just made that up, but I hope so.
We have a number of questions.
There's a question in the chat.
I was going to focus on one that's related to this bar, and then I'll go back to the others that we get more general. So somebody asked, the olive note is so delicious and memorable. Is olive actually involved in the production process?
No. It was a shock.
The answer is no.
It's just a descriptor.
It just shows the uniqueness of this bean.
And that adds
the chocolate making process.
That adds to Damien's argument, whereby the fats are carriers of flavor, and the olives, as you know, carry olive oil, which is the perfect carrier for that type of flavor. It is probable that what you're tasting in the black olive is like these anthocyanins, the polyphenols, carried as they're carried by the fat. And I think that your answer was very correct, because just some flavors are volatile, are very small molecules. You perceive them with your nose and retro-olfactory notes, but you can't perceive it with your mouth.
So let's go on to añejo, and then I'm going to ask a question, why don't we taste it first? We've got a number of questions. You can be thinking about your answer here, Damien, about why you're using lecithin 1, what does it add to the process, and why sunflower lecithin. But let's taste, and then you can maybe speak to that. So now we're on añejo, the 71%. I like to taste from highest percent to lowest percent, which is kind of what we're doing here. But in this case, they're all pretty close. And but I think we also decided that the flavor profiles kind of made sense to go in this direction. So you can try different things there.
This bean is one of my favorites.
And didn't you guys age the beans in rum barrels?
Hence the name.
Yeah. So just for those of you who asked about the tasting process, just a reiteration, use all 5 senses. So look at it. Mine's a little scuffed because I've had it open for a few weeks. But you want to see it nice and smooth and shiny. You want to break it, nice snap sound, rub it between your fingers under your nose, take some small sniffs, then go ahead, put it in your mouth. Maybe take Damien's approach where you hold it on the roof of your mouth with your tongue after you let it melt a little bit and suck in and out some air. And that's really how you're going to experience the flavor. And feel free to write your comments in chat about the bars you're tasting too. So you're welcome to share. There's so many people, it's hard to have a discussion, but we'd love to see your comments in the chat. So feel free to share. I've done a lot of tastings where people just start writing their comments. It's a lot of fun for us to be able to see what people are tasting and how they're experiencing the bar. Okay, Diana says the textures are so great. I agree. I was really blown away. I have to be honest. I'd only tried your New York bars, I think once. And in the middle of tasting a lot of other chocolate, so I hadn't really paid attention to them, I have to be honest. And
I remember
I got these and I was blown away.
In Seattle last year.
Yes, but I was just blown away by these. So
okay, I see also
So
a lot
let's
of
go.
the basic taste chemicals like sugar and salt are completely odorless, so their presence can also cause different notes to be emphasized on the palate relative to the olfactory palate. Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. They're
what we're talking
modifiers.
about.
And so, Damien, maybe you could talk a little bit about lecithin.
Lecithin, in our case, lecithin, the primary function for lecithin for most people is as an emulsifier. However,
What is an emulsifier?
It's when you're stabilizing the mixture of fats and water, right? Because they don't want to hang out together. And so like making an aioli or something of this nature, it's an emulsion. And lecithin used in that capacity does not, it allows you to stabilize that emulsion and keep it longer, make it more shelf stable. In our case, it's, chocolate's a suspension. It is not an emulsion. And so the primary function of lecithin is a viscosity modifier. Something like 0.1% of lecithin can replace 1% of cocoa butter. And when you think about the economics of that, especially on a larger scale, now that might not be felt by a small company, doing small batches, you're talking about pennies, but that adds up for a large company. And so the the added benefit of reducing viscosity without having to add as much cocoa butter is there on a financial sense. We use it, for a couple of different reasons. One of which is, our chocolate, and maybe this is possibly because, I come from an end usage background. And so for me, I'm always thinking about, making chocolate bars for bar's sake is interesting, but not as interesting as making chocolate for me for end usage, quite frankly. I mean, if it's good enough to make a chocolate mousse with, it's definitely good enough to eat in a chocolate bar. And so basically what we mostly make here, not entirely, is couverture. And, what has been found also, interestingly enough, is that lecithin helps with the nucleation of cocoa butter in its B form, right? It acts as a mimic. So as you're tempering, cocoa butter, we have Selmy machines here. And while they don't give you the most control, I have quite a bit of experience in the past working with them with bean to bar stuff. And you get a better quality crystal out of it if you're willing to use a little less of it. The other side of it is for flavor, honestly. I'm constantly judging flavor. And if I can put a little bit of lecithin in, change the butter addition.
Cocoa butter.
The cocoa butter addition, then that allows me to play with flavor coming off the liquor. Now, we happen to be very fortunate as a company that have some really amazingly tasting cocoa butter that is so flavor forward that I believe that actually our natural cocoa butter benefits from conching. So when I choose to put it in maybe earlier than you would say traditionally, because it requires a degree of conch to really round out and open up. And so the lecithin allows me to play with that. It helps with the melt. It allows me to adjust flavor profiles via adjusting cocoa butter percentages. So I can still have the viscosity, but then have a stronger flavor note. And that's the primary reason why I use it. Is that
so just to recap, by putting in the lecithin, you're able to add less cocoa butter?
Yeah.
And
then I need to adjust. Yeah.
Somebody's asking, well, okay, we got a bunch of cocoa butter questions. Sure. Can you talk about your use of cocoa butter and how much you figure out how you figure out how much to add, and I guess why you've chosen to add extra cocoa butter? And then, is the cocoa butter from your beans?
Definitely, the cocoa butter is from our beans. That's it's all in-house, fully vertically integrated from the farms up. We have our own cocoa powder, our own cocoa butter, and our own chocolate. So we have all of that.
Is it deodorized cocoa butter, or is it cocoa butter from each of the farms?
I don't know the specifics. I mean, what we use here, we have some that is deodorized and we have some that's natural. And it's really my choice, our choice as a team to decide maybe this batch would benefit. We have some bars, the Magdalena, for instance, which, people really like. It's a very unique profile. So with something like that, and actually the añejo, I prefer to use a deodorized because I don't want any extra flavor. There's a lot going on with these beans aging in these barrels. And our natural butter has a degree of acidity to it and a strong flavor profile, which I think is lovely for most things. But with something like this, I don't want to crowd out the qualities of oak and the tannins that go along with that I find so special and what makes me very excited about this bean in general.
I would like to just a quick note on our cocoa butter. Even our deodorized butter is not precisely deodorized. It's a very simple process that we I think we came up with, I haven't read it in any literature or any book, it is simply washed, which means that we add distilled water to our cocoa butter and we slowly evaporate that water at a temperature of approximately 70 degrees Celsius. And what happens is that some of the residuals, the scum, comes up as when we are doing a broth, basically, and we skim it off and allow by weight, and we know that by weight the water is evaporated. So it's a very soft washing and deodorization process, very delicate and very soft on the butter.
Okay. So, but you're not, if somebody's asking, are you using cocoa butter from a, like, in other words, the añejo doesn't have añejo cocoa butter in it, but Daisy says you're thinking about experimenting with that in New York.
Yes, we
Yeah.
have not used this differentiation on the cocoa butter. What we normally do is squeezing cocoa butter out of a 3-day fermented cacao, which still tastes very much like cacao, but it's relatively neutral and not so invasive.
I know that Damien wanted to try this with one of our single estate chocolates. So hopefully, maybe next year we can get to that.
That'd be cool.
COVID.
And before we move off of añejo, Max and Damien, both of you, is there anything you want to tell us more about the farm, why you decided to age these particular beans in rum barrels? Love to hear about that.
I don't, to tell you very frankly, I don't know why we chose to use those specific beans, but it happens once and then we kept the tradition.
It happens like
And
that.
very, very frank. So there's no mystery behind it. What is interesting is that when and from whom we bought those barrels were bought by me back in the age 2000. And at the beginning, our idea was to giving those barrels to the farmers, like 40,000 farmers, to have them ferment their cacao inside the barrels. But then we took the opposite way of centralizing. So we kept that barrels and kept them clean and washed every year until we found that it could be a good idea to try and use them for aging cacao. It's not that simple. It took us many years to find a way to do that without spoiling them, because in our environment, with our climate, humidity, and temperature, if you just leave the cacao there inside a inside a barrel, it will certainly spoil, be attacked by insects, of moths of any sort, lose too much weight, and be attacked by mold and yeasts. So there is a protected environment where this aging happens.
Okay. And that's after they've been dried, you're aging them in there.
Exactly. Yes.
And so you're no longer doing the fermentation in those barrels with the individual
We never
farmer.
did. We never,
You never
did.
did.
We
Okay,
never did.
got it. Got it.
And
Well,
we
and
bought it
just-
from Barcelona,
Say that again.
from Barcelona rum.
Okay. Oh, yes.
It's the
okay.
second
I
largest
still have a
producer in
small
the
bottle
DR.
from my trip to the DR.
And just in
What
case
about
anyone
the-
wants additional information, I'm also going to post the link to an episode where we actually discuss this cacao profile with more detail. This is for the podcast purpose too, so you guys can also listen to that.
That'd be great. Thank you. All right. Shall we move on to West Indian here, our final bar?
Let's do it.
Go ahead and taste. While you're tasting, I'm going to answer. Somebody asked this question. I'd answered it before we started, but I'll since people were still coming on, what beverages to drink this with. And I was just saying, when I do a tasting initially, I like to just have lukewarm water to help cleanse my palate with some cocoa butter, maybe some plain crackers and bread, but I try to keep other beverages out of it. And it's not, but then I'll go back and try it with things. So you can try, I enjoy trying it with brown liquors like bourbon, scotch, whiskey. I'm a oolong tea lover, so like good black or oolong teas could be nice.
Oolong and chocolate are fabulous.
Yeah, I mean, I'm into my oolong tea like I'm into my single origin chocolate. It sounds like you might be too, Damien.
And if you're
rums,
from
I'm sure I haven't done rums. I'm sure you guys have.
If you're from the Marcel Priscilla school, you're going to use polenta.
Yes, I'm a judge at the International Chocolate Awards, and we all have to make our soupy polenta recipe. And it's like it surprisingly works very well, but you're cleansing with soupy polenta.
We have a question, very interesting for Damien. Have you made hot chocolate from these bars? I bet they'd be great. We did specific hot chocolate.
Yeah, we did some with Nacional last winter, and we were starting to get into that. And honestly, as we were starting to get into that, once again, there was a lot of changes that everyone had to go through. So that just kind of got pushed off the back burner. And then once things started kicking up again, it was warm season. And so we were focusing on other products. But yes, it was some of the thoughts we were having for the store, and the concept was actually to do like flights of origin hot chocolate, where you can really, in its warm format, you can really taste the origins. You can really taste a lot of things, maybe even better in some cases than actually eating the chocolate itself, just because it is warm already. The fat is open, things are real volatile, volatilize really well, and you can really experience things in a more profound way when it's hot.
The ripe banana description here is spot on. There's some brown sugar in here as well that reminds me of bananas. Yeah, this is from Nicholas. Yeah, the banana. Agreed.
I know, again, like I said, I normally don't agree with tasting notes, but with all of yours, I agree. And it goes back to the fact that you can control, and you've obviously done a lot of good work around that. I just, man, I love this bar. I love all three of them, but I particularly love this one.
Well, we're debunking some myths here, right, Lauren?
I hope so. I hope so.
Some chocolate makers are true to the notes.
Somebody's asking, Damien mentioned that they do micro batches. Does that mean that the bars we see today will not be available in the future, or is it repeated in micro lots?
It's repeated
We're
in micro lots.
experimenting a lot.
Exactly.
We're experimenting. We're seeing what people like, what they don't, and based on that, we'll decide.
I'm actually going to quote something Max said the other day, which should go like in the history books of chocolate and cacao.
Wow. What a
So he said, I wrote it down just so I don't get it wrong. We make chocolate to highlight our distinctive cacao profiles, and we make these distinctive cacao profiles for the best chocolate makers to use as ingredients in their recipes.
Oh, very good.
So hopefully that answers that question.
Judy is asking why you chose sunflower for your lecithin source. I think I know the answer to that one, but go ahead, Damien.
It was a company directive. We use it down in our factory in DR. We use it here. It hits a number of bullet points. Obviously, for our kosher certification, sunflower is a little bit more easier in with the bar certification on the chocolate bars as opposed to the grain-based soy and what have you. And there is some biases these days with GMO and GMO soy. And so sunflower allows you to sort of circumvent that.
I was going to say, as a retailer, that was one of the biggest requests, was people wanted soy-free chocolate, and they were okay with sunflower lecithin, but a number of chocolate makers add soy lecithin, and then it's like that really rules out that whole soy avoiding crowd, which I may become one of soon. It's interesting, since you said that, I didn't realize what small batches you were making, and I'm now like buying up a bunch for some bundles I'm putting together.
You hit us hard
on the website.
You hit us hard. That's all I'm saying.
Hard. I had no idea. I was buying like a third of your production.
Nadia and I were talking about this the other day. These are good problems. These are wonderful
Thank
problems.
you so much, Lauren.
I love your bars, man.
I think personally, I really thought of you because obviously we really did hit it off last year in Seattle for the events, but because you appreciate this entire process that we go through and all of these single origin chocolate makers, and it's not just about pretty packaging and not just about the awards. I mean, clearly all of these chocolates are definitely award worthy, but we have to get people educated on everything that goes on behind them. So
right.
That's
right.
I immediately thought of you for this, so it was like a perfect match, really.
Well, thank you guys. This is really fun. What was I just going to say? I'm now totally. I had one more point. I was going to say, let's talk about your collection.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about that then. So maybe you could. I know you wanted to talk about your complete collection there. So go ahead and do that.
Nadia, if you want to
I thought we'll
explain
come
it while I
back.
get this ready.
Yeah, so we wanted for the holidays to have something that people could gift to their loved ones, family, friends. And we thought that this would be a great idea of showing everything we've done in the past year in our Brooklyn store, and to also have our complete collection, and so that people can try everything that we have made. And it's going to be released this week in our Brooklyn store. And it includes 15 chocolate bars, which are the 15 bars that we have made this past year, and the 15 bars that were most liked by people. And it's yeah, we decided to do it for the holiday season, but we're going to keep it and be changing the bars as we make more and have our 15 little a chocolate bar collection. And you can see it here in the camera. It's a great gift for anyone that loves chocolate. And yeah.
And allow me to not be too modest this time, but I think that developing close to 20 chocolate bars in less than 1 year is quite a feat, is quite an achievement. So I think that Damien, in this respect, has done a fantastic job because they're not only very good, every one of them, but also absolutely distinctive and distinguishable.
And I think this is also a great product for chocolate makers because we have all of our cacao profiles recipes represented here in one percentage or another. So it's like the best homage to the beans that we have available
Exactly.
for craft chocolate makers.
It's part of our motto of we make chocolate to show the potential of our beans.
And I think that was the
So
point. Thank you for reminding me of the point I was going to make. So many of the bars that I know many of you love, or quite a few of them that are from the Dominican Republic by small batch makers, are often using beans from Rizek. And it may be beans that they're purchasing. Stop me if I'm wrong, but they're purchasing from these lots, or it may be I mean, you guys do some specific fermentation recipes for specific makers, correct?
Absolutely. All the cacao we produce, there is no such thing as one general type of cocoa. We produce cacao bespoke to measure, and it's always a project with the customer. It might be a very small chocolate maker. For example, I don't know, I remember Steve DeVries buying 2 bags per year, and it can be the Mars family, it can be anything, but we learn from everyone and we respect everyone, and it's always a project. And at this point, so far, we have more than 50 types of cacao that we're currently producing and selling jealously.
Wow.
If I can
Okay.
add one thing to what Max just said,
Yeah.
specific to New York and what we're doing here, I think, which is really great for other people who might be interested, who are hobbyists or other makers, is that with the exception of like really one bean, all our beans, it's the same beans you would buy to make chocolate that we make chocolate. You know, we're pulling from the same lots, we're doing the same thing. So it's not like we're getting something special here that, you know, if you want to get the same name, it's called El Valle, it's going to be a different thing. It's the same.
Yeah, and our treatment is so individualized that Damien doesn't get the same beans as our factory in the DR does. So it's really very special for everyone.
And I mean, I think even just to highlight the distinctiveness in these beans and the variety of things that you can do with these, one of the best examples we have so far is the La Magdalena bundle, which is one of our single estate chocolates. Damien has 3 different percentages already with beans coming from one estate, and then we have an additional one which is a 90% with candied nibs. I mean, there's just so many possibilities. It's like we write on
So
everything, but it's
like
true. It's like
declensions of the
infinite
same verb.
possibilities. If anybody has any additional questions or wants to reach out to us for any specific purposes, feel free to do so. You can email us or write to us in any of our social media networks, on social networks. We are info@kahkow.com. And make sure to follow Lauren on her Instagram too. She's at Chief Chocophile and at Chocolopolis. Be sure to follow us as well. We keep posting, the new things, new creations, the new chocolate bars that we are producing at the store. We're doing, pictures of our farmers, our post-harvest center. And thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. Don't just take our word for it. Try these other chocolates. They're just amazing, so distinctive one from the other. And don't forget, the cacao is a one-stop shop for chocolate makers and chocolate lovers in the quest for the finest ingredients for their creations. Thank you so much.
thank you, Lauren.
Yeah, thank you
Thank you,
guys very
Lauren.
much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks everyone
Thanks,
for
Lauren.
joining.